All right, Mark, I think I've pressed record and it looks like we have 77 people here, so I think you can kick off.
Good afternoon, everyone. Um, Welcome to this webinar. I believe there's potentially more than 200 of us online, which would be absolutely fantastic. And I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you to this first episode of 3 webinars, which are planned about Parkinson's and technology, which we are focusing on intelligent apps, devices, and solutions to support people with Parkinson's. My name is Mark van Grieken and I've lived with Parkinson's at least 16 years. I'm chair of the Dundee Research Interest Group, which is part of the Parkinson's UK Support Research Network. The Research Support Network brings together people driven to help find a cure and better treatments for Parkinson until such cure is found. People join the Research Support Network in order to learn more about the research, but they also receive opportunities to take part and participate in trials or in shaping the research going forward. The key role of the network is to increase awareness and understanding of research, to encourage participation in research, and to encourage and support patient and public involvement in shaping that research. Local research interest groups, such as the Dundee Research Interest Group, form a local hub of activities, events, information, etc., and often also have connections with local research institutes. We have a steering committee and a wider group of supporters. And we would very much welcome more supporters or people who might be interested in the steering committee. If you're interested, please say so in the chat box or contact the Dundee Research Interest Group. This series of events about Parkinson and technology is organized by the Special Interest Group on Parkinson's and technology, in conjunction with our Research Interest Group. And of course, overall under the umbrella of Parkinson's UK. The topic area is also particularly linked to topics that will be playing a role at the World Parkinson's Congress or Conference. As their name implies, the special interest groups are groups of people with Parkinson's and others with a particular interest in a particular area of research, in this case, obviously technology. Establish the special interest group on Parkinson and technology that I presented to you today was established substantially by Werner Remmeler. Werner was the first secretary we had in the Dundee Research Interest Group. In my view, Werner is exceptionally innovative, as is proved by this webinar, committed and inspiring. Werner became aware of his Parkinson when his piano playing became to be affected. In particular, he articulates, in my view, our condition very well. Parkinson is not a death sentence, it's a life sentence, he says. The latter on its own is possibly a positive thing, but on the negative side, it is obviously that Parkinson ruins most of your life as you know it. And also we don't know what lies in store for us. Werner is a fantastic person. He's a very nice man too. And he shuns the limelight, but here it is, Werner. Thank you very much. To make things running very smoothly from here on, John Mihinick will take over. John has been an active volunteer within Parkinson's UK for many years, and he chairs the 5 support group. He's also a member of the Dundee Research Interest Group Steering Committee and an excellent chair and compare of events like this. I'm sure John will keep us all right and make the afternoon running smoothly. Over to you, John.
Thank you, Mark. And good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to be the chairman for this event. And as Mark said, I'm a volunteer for Parkinson's UK, and in particular, the chairman of the support group for Fife in Scotland. Let me start with a technical point. If you have any questions or comments during the afternoon, please put them in the Q&A box rather than the chat box. And we will endeavour to use your questions and comments during the podium discussion later on this afternoon. To provide a personal background to this afternoon's presentation, it's my pleasure to introduce our special guest, Rory Cellan-Jones, the BBC's technology correspondent. who's been doing that job for quite a period. In fact, from the dot-com bubble in the late 1990s to the Zoom platform that we're using today, from the Zion personal organizer to the iPad, he's covered all the big gadget and business stories. Rory was actually diagnosed with Parkinson's 3 years ago this month. And since then, he's taken a keen interest in how technology can help people with Parkinson's. So over to you, Rory.
Thanks very much, John. Very good to join all of you. We're all living on Zoom these days, aren't we? It's beginning to drive me up the wall. I have 3 Zooms every morning before 10:30, but this is a much better than most. Most of mine are work related, and it's getting people to shut up is always a challenge. And you wouldn't believe that the technology section of the BBC still has problems with people being on mute when they shouldn't be. Anyway, as you've heard, I was diagnosed with Parkinson's in actually 2 years ago, January 2018. 2 days before I was due to fly off to the world's biggest gadget fest, which is called CES in Las Vegas. And I leapt on an aircraft and had a very rigorous week tramping over Las Vegas, staying up too late, drinking too much, working too hard, and reflecting on the fact that I'd got this life-changing condition, and trying not to worry about it too much, and starting to think about how technology, which has been, my life for the last 10, 15 years, covering advances in technology, how it might help me and others with this condition. I'd already begun thinking about this because 3 months or so before I was actually diagnosed, I went to see a company in London called Meadowpad, right at the top of the Millbank Tower in London. They were working with one of the biggest companies in the world in artificial intelligence, Tencent, Chinese company. And they were developing an app to monitor and diagnose Parkinson's, monitor symptoms of Parkinson's. And I was there to do a story about this before I'd been diagnosed. And I came into a room where they were filming somebody in front of a screen, and they were asking them to do this, open and close their hands. And the idea was that by filming this and uploading it into an app, and analyzing the data using artificial intelligence techniques, machine learning techniques, they would be able to monitor the progress, the presence, and then the progress of a patient with Parkinson's. And I stood there filming this and thinking, actually, I find that quite difficult. Maybe there's something going on with me. And I'd already had some suspicions because I was dragging my foot by that stage, and I'd already had an appointment booked to see a doctor about it. Anyway, I put a story up, as I stressed, 3 months before I was diagnosed, about this company and this interesting research that they were doing. Thought no more about it. And then after I'd been diagnosed, a year later, I went back to that same company to talk to them again and asked them whether they thought, when they saw me, whether maybe there was something about me. And they were slightly 50-50 about whether they had actually noticed that maybe I had those symptoms too. But I managed to get myself on a trial of the app that they have been developing with King's College Hospital in London. And that trial involved me being filmed each week by a member of my family doing something like 20 exercises. That one, but a whole bunch of others, getting up from a chair and so on. All of which was fed into the trial. And then something slightly strange happened. Although I was admitted late to the trial and was not particularly involved, I didn't hear any more about it, and everything went a bit quiet. And what that kind of said to me was that we are still at a really early stage, and this is very exciting. The kind of technology that is being employed to measure symptoms in particular, and give a more kind of granular analysis of a patient with Parkinson's. We all know that we go away for 6 months and then see a consultant again, and they say, how have things changed? And it's quite difficult to measure it. And if one of these apps, because there are several of these apps, did take off, then it would give a kind of constant readout to your doctor and possibly be useful in managing your treatment a bit better. But it really struck me that this is still at an early stage, and progress may not be quite as fast as we hoped. So I've spent this last year, when we've all been in lockdown, writing a book about the smartphone era. And the book is about all sorts of areas in which these incredible devices, have both changed our lives, changed the economy, changed the way we live and work, for the good and sometimes for ill. But it's also given me the opportunity to think about what these devices and other advances in technology could do for treatment and for research into possible cures for Parkinson's. So there's huge amounts of excitement around smartphones and apps and various ways that they can be used in the healthcare field. But what's also struck me is there's a huge amount of hype, and quite a lot of these things don't go anywhere. So it's trying to delve into exactly what is possible with a bit of caution about how rapidly they will make a difference. And what's also struck me is that, quite apart from the kind of slightly flashy, exciting, short-term work with apps and so on, the real important work that's going on has been going on for a long time. I visited the Parkinson's Brain Bank in London last February and made a short film about that. That is the kind of long-term research that is really incredibly important, perhaps more important than apps and that kind of area. And what's also important is the work on drug discovery, which really could be changed and could be accelerated by artificial intelligence techniques. So there's a lot of big picture things going on, which may be more important for all of us than the kind of more flashy, short-term app-related things. The single most important, most useful app I have, by the way, is one which pops up on my screen, is about to pop up again, reminding me to take my pills. So there are all sorts of developments, some of them important, some of them not so important, some of them a bit fringe. And I'm really looking forward to this afternoon because I'm hoping to learn quite a lot about where we're going with technology and Parkinson's. And we've got a fantastic panel, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rory. And thank you for that personal background, and also the background to the discussions today from your professional standing. So thank you very much. For those who may have just joined us, just a reminder to put any questions or comments in the Q&A box as we go along, and we'll deal with them later. Our first presentation this afternoon comes from Professor Lynn Rochester. Lynn is a professor of human movement science at Newcastle University, and her research interests focus on understanding and mitigating mobility loss in aging and neurodegenerative disease, and conversely, what mobility can tell us about brain health. So Lynn's topic this afternoon is Time to Change, the role of digital technology in the future Parkinson's disease healthcare. And her talk will focus on the key developments in the use of digital healthcare tools to measure and monitor Parkinson's, and highlight why this is important. This is important in driving therapeutic change. So good afternoon, Lynn. The stage is yours.
Thanks very much. I'm just going to share my screen. And can I just check that you can see the slides and not the present notes view?
Yes, correct.
Okay, great. So good afternoon, everybody. Firstly, I'd like to say thanks to the organisers for inviting me to give this talk today. I'm absolutely delighted to be here, and this is a really important topic, I think, in management of Parkinson's disease. So as indicated, I'm going to focus on the role of digital technology and how this may influence the future of Parkinson's disease healthcare. These are my disclosures. So I don't really need to emphasize how much COVID has had an impact on all of our lives. It's also had an impact, a dramatic impact on healthcare and on research. And what it really has done has focused and highlighted the limitations of our current models of clinical management and also the way we run trials. And in doing so, it's really highlighted that now more than ever, we need to modernize our approach to healthcare so that, in fact, it's really fit for the future. And it's also resilient to challenges because no doubt we will have more of them in the future. So it's time for us to think about change. Parkinson's by its nature, and I don't need to emphasize this to you, would benefit significantly from a modernized approach. Parkinson's is common, as we know, and it's also complex, as shown on this slide, with many different symptoms. Clinical management and research are directed to treatments to improve symptomatic therapy, to reduce motor fluctuations in order to maintain mobility over the course of the day. And also there are other promising efforts to drive forward neuroprotective therapies in order to protect and preserve the brain. Because no two people with Parkinson's are alike, personalized strategies and self-care are also really, really important and urgently needed. And treatments are absolutely important, but just as important in some ways are the tools to manage Parkinson's. They need to correctly identify people with PD and to do so early so that management can begin early. Ideally, they would identify people in the prodromal phases of Parkinson's, that is before symptoms have started to occur. They need to be able to monitor the severity of Parkinson's and how it's changing over time in responding to any therapies, and to predict adverse clinical events so that future risk of falls or problems with memory, amongst other things, can be identified and treatment can begin early in order to prevent or delay those adverse clinical events. And in turn, by doing this and by having better tools, this prompts and promotes better treatment, better management, personalized care, and self-management. But it's actually not so easy to develop those tools. And let me just illustrate the reason why. We've just heard from Rory about tests that he was involved in with a company. On this slide, and don't worry about reading the detail on the slide, but I'm sure you're all familiar with this. This shows the best clinical tool available to measure and monitor Parkinson's. It's called the MDS, the Movement Disorder Society Unified Parkinson's Disease Rating Scale, and this is the gold standard that's available at the moment. It contains a combination of patient and clinician reported questions, and it covers a whole range of different symptoms. And undergone extensive testing, and it's a very good tool. However, it also has some critical and key limitations. It requires people to visit a clinic, and this has a high burden not only on the patient but also on the staff, making it very labor and resource intensive and difficult at the moment because, of course, all of us are experiencing lack of ability to move around. It has issues of reliability, and this is because it provides a snapshot in time. That's if the scale is even run, so that you may provide a snapshot every 12 months or possibly every 6 months, or maybe not in some cases, depending on time in the clinic. It works quite well in the mid stages of Parkinson's disease, but in the early stages and the later stages, it lacks sensitivity. And the scale itself is trying to do absolutely everything. And because of this, and these points that I've just raised, this brings issues of sensitivity and accuracy in the information that can be gleaned from this. So complementary tools are really needed to support clinical decision making, research, and personalized medicine for patients. Digital technology really plays a role in this space. It's of significant interest to overcome some of the limitations of existing scales. And you can see there's a wide variety of technology as shown on this slide. And that technology is able to measure movement and a whole range of other physiological signals such as heart rate and blood pressure. Data can be sampled continuously and stored locally on the device for download later or wirelessly transmitted to the cloud via Wi-Fi. And this allows for greater flexibility of healthcare clinical management and research and remote testing. Testing can also be deployed at home using two different approaches. Active testing, in which an individual will go through a series of tests, and they may be finger tapping, as we've just heard, or balance tests, or walking tests, memory tests, or passive testing, in which a device or a smartphone or other technology is simply there, either being worn or in the background, sampling and collecting information, but it doesn't require the individual to interact with it. And it's feasible using a single wearable device or a smartphone and an app to monitor multiple features that are highly relevant to people with Parkinson's disease. And you can see on this slide, such as sleep, walking, balance, falls, speech, symptoms, memory. And monitoring these features through both active and passive testing. And it's feasible to do this as well in the home environment, which means that there's no need to visit a clinic. So the opportunity is clear for people with Parkinson's. So that sounds great. I think we've just heard a question from Rory that it all sounds absolutely marvelous, but really we have to ask the question, is it too good to be true? What's the evidence and where are we at the moment? And how does this look for the future? So what I want to do now is to focus really on research, which is an early adopter of technology. I'm highlighting here two recent systematic reviews. There's been an awful lot of reviews in this area if anyone wants to do some further reading. But most of the early adoption does come from research rather than clinical practice, and that is where I want to consider the evidence. If, however, research adopts technology and does this well and shows the benefit, then it is the step change towards more routine adoption in clinical care. So I'm going to highlight a few different studies now that point to the needs of those two measurement tools that I had on an earlier slide. So this first study is a study by Roche Pharma, who developed a combined monitoring system using a smartphone that included an active test, and we can see the sort of tests here: balance, finger tapping, walking, amongst other symptoms, and also a passive monitoring where they patients were asked to carry their smartphones with them in their pocket as they went about everyday activities. The purpose of this study was to identify and validate measures, these digital measures of early Parkinson's disease, and to monitor the severity of Parkinson's disease. They wanted particularly to show that these tests would identify people with Parkinson's from those who did not have Parkinson's. 43 people with Parkinson's and 35 controls were recruited into the study. And those people carried out these series of tests every day for a period of 6 months, and then carried their smartphone with them each day after that. And what the investigators found were that all of the active tests were able to distinguish people with Parkinson's from those people who didn't. And particularly, they were also able to identify people with very, very mild disease, so very mild symptoms. And you can see by these bars. Only one test didn't differentiate, and that was the test of speech. Importantly, the tests were associated with the gold standard, and this is important because it shows that the relationship with the severity of Parkinson's itself. But also importantly, when they looked at adherence for people carrying out these daily tests, they found that this was only 61% of people adhered to carrying out daily testing, and this particularly tailed off towards the end of the 6-month period. And that's an important point when we think about deploying these sort of technologies. Are people really prepared to use them and prepared to stick with it? And it's something that we need to certainly keep an eye on. When they looked at the smartphone monitoring, so the passive monitoring, what they found was that, unsurprisingly, people with Parkinson's were less active than people without. They moved at a slower speed, and they also had fewer transitions. That's getting from sitting to standing. 34% less active transitions, in fact. But what this study showed was the possibility of smartphones to identify Parkinson's disease in people with early Parkinson's and differentiate disease severity. So it showed support for these potential utility of the tool to do this. Moving to another study, this study aimed to determine if a smartphone, again, using a smartphone, could be used to remotely quantify Parkinson's motor symptom severity. Once again, participants were asked to remotely complete 5 tests of similar type as the ones in the previous study every day for 6 months using a smartphone app. In this case, data from the sensors were combined into a single severity score, the Parkinson's disease severity score, which ranged from 0 to 100, with 100 being the most severe. And this is an example of artificial intelligence being used to crunch an awful lot of data. The smartphone and the app were then tested in 27 people with Parkinson's and 17 people who didn't have Parkinson's, who were then monitored for 6 months. And what the study was able to show was the vast symptom fluctuation that was occurring between days. And you can see the difference between that and what would happen if you were measuring someone every 6 months using the Unified Parkinson's Disease Rating Scale. The score was also responsive to medication intake and correlated with gold standard testing. But if we're thinking about monitoring symptoms and trying to smooth out symptom fluctuation, it's really important to have this level of granularity for patient management. What the app showed, again, was the potential for automated disease severity measurement and monitoring with a smartphone and the algorithm run on the smartphone. Another study that used a smartphone and an app, and again, similar types of tests were carried out. What this study wanted to do was to adopt a similar machine learning approach, so to carry out these tests and then combine them all and extract the relevant features to see if it was feasible to predict adverse clinical outcomes at 18 months in an 18-month follow-up visit. And what the researchers were able to show was that the 30 most salient features from all of the tests that were carried out, and I think there were over 200, in fact, probably there were more than 200 salient features, but they were able to show that it was possible to predict motor cognitive memory type problems, and functional impairment at an 18-month follow-up assessment with a reasonable level of accuracy of the prediction model. But in essence, again, this study showed the potential for personalized prediction for clinical care and intervention, with the ability to think in the future as these sort of approaches are more developed, of the ability to target individuals for, that are at greater risk and have a much more focused and personalized approach to treatment. Taking a slightly different approach, this is a study that used wearable technology, a single wearable worn on the lower trunk to measure walking and different characteristics of walking. And this study was interested to see if it was possible to predict people who would go on to develop Parkinson's disease in the future from a group of 696 healthy controls who were followed up every 2 years. It was a study that was carried out in Germany in collaboration with myself and my team in Newcastle who did the analysis, the analytics on the data. And what the study was able to demonstrate was that gait analysis with a wearable device predicts conversion to Parkinson's disease. And with our analysis, it was we were able to show that that change started 4 years prior to diagnosis. Continuing along a similar theme, this is another piece of work that we carried out in collaboration with Michelle Hugh from Oxford University, where we measured continuous real-world gait over 7 days using a single wearable device to see if it was possible to discriminate people with REM sleep behavior disorder who have a high risk of going on to develop Parkinson's from controls, to see again if it's feasible to start to identify these prodromal markers and really know who is at risk in an early stage, which is important for development of neuroprotective therapies. And we found this was feasible. There was an association with clinical scales, but it also provided us with novel information and insights and was well tolerated. So as I say, this highlights the potential to identify prodromal Parkinson's and risk of conversion to Parkinson's with low-cost wearables. So that's great, and that's research that's showing some potential for the future. And they promise that smartphones and wearables may provide to diagnose, measure and monitor Parkinson's severity and predict future risk using a combination of either active testing and some passive testing. The tests typically are based on the unified, the UPDRS, the gold standard, which is great. And they provide a greater granularity with a more reliable picture and without the need to attend a clinic. However, there is a burden associated with the active testing, and because they're sticking to a tried and tested scale and trying to replicate that, there's always a question about whether there's a missed opportunity there, and we're really not using this technology and gaining the benefits from the technology. There are also issues around compliance. Will people use it? Will people do the active testing? So what I want to do now is just to focus a little bit on what some of the other benefits may be of using these sort of particularly wearable technologies and continuous passive monitoring to see if it's possible to gain insights, explore if it's possible to gain insights into Parkinson's that were previously unobtainable using this sort of tech. And I'm going to show you some examples of where they may have benefits in the future. So one of the things that a lot of research does, and also your clinicians are interested in, is monitoring fluctuations in motor symptoms in order to develop therapies or adjust treatment to smooth out those fluctuations so that individuals are as functional as possible across the course of the day and the burden of PD is lowered as much as possible. And what a group found that were studying this in the States, they looked at the frequency of motor symptom fluctuation in a series of studies that they did. And what they demonstrated was that motor symptoms fluctuate at a rate higher than can be captured by diary or video recording. The reason that I say that, if you enter a research project and we're really trying to understand symptom fluctuation, currently the gold standard to do this is to ask people to fill out a diary every 30 minutes, and that is massively burdensome for people to be able to do, and consequently there isn't very good compliance with that approach. So this team demonstrated very clearly that the only way this is really feasible is with the use of wearable technology and ideally passive continuous remote monitoring. And they're carrying out a piece of work now on an electronic symptom diary, which can be used in the future and will be hugely beneficial. Some events and some symptoms in Parkinson's are really difficult to observe in the clinic due to their episodic nature. And by that, I mean freezing of gait. And this is an example of a lady moving around in her lounge who is suffering quite extreme episodes of freezing. The reason freezing is difficult is because it's highly episodic and tends not to reveal itself when someone is being observed and they know they're being observed, because they're concentrating on their movement more, and that means they're able to override the symptom. There is research ongoing now that shows it may be feasible using artificial intelligence, in essence, to look at the raw signal to identify these episodes. This would be enormously powerful if it's feasible, if we can make this more deployable. It's not an easy task, and validation in this space will be difficult, but there's quite a lot of work going on now to really improve the algorithms around freezing detection. Similarly, two other symptoms that are highly problematic are falls, and you can see this on the left-hand side of the slide. Falls occur in up to 80% of people with Parkinson's. They have a dramatic impact on lives and mortality. They're rare events and they're difficult to objectively capture. So any tools that help us to measure falls in a more objective way would be very, very important to understand the effects of therapies. The gold standard for falls, of course, is to rely on paper diaries and self-report, and that's very, very unreliable and difficult to do. And studies are starting to show that it may be feasible to monitor falls objectively with wearable devices. Now, again, this is an area where more work is needed, but the promise is clear and starting to emerge. Sleep disorders are also highly common in Parkinson's and are often underestimated because they rely once again on self-report or the bed partner. They significantly impact quality of life and increase carer burden. And a lot of work is going on now to explore the role of accelerometers. And by using accelerometers from our own work, it's been shown that we can evaluate sleep interruptions, getting out of bed in the night, moving around and turning, and the velocity of those turns. And that gives us tools to have a much better quantitative and objective evaluation of sleep. Moving to a slightly different approach. This is a very small pilot study, but I think it's really interesting because there's a lot of interest in different ways of monitoring. This is a study that looked at passive monitoring at home, and it provided an image of the bigger picture of functional impairment and further novel insights of the true burden of Parkinson's on everyday activities. So this is an example of ambient sensing or passive monitoring using radio wave sensing device. And this is a device you can see outlined in the green box here. This uses ultra low power radio signals that reflect off individuals that are within a certain range. Those signals return to the device, and it allows the position of a person to be extracted, providing a picture of home-based activity. This isn't a video, this is where people are in space and how long they spend in those different parts of that space. The tool was validated against the motion capture system and showed to have very good accuracy. Interestingly, it can be installed in less than an hour and hangs on the wall like a picture. And encrypted data that are collected are transferred via Wi-Fi for further analysis. And I'm just going to show you two examples of the sort of data that can be extracted. The device is able to provide novel visualizations of activity at home. And here, movement visualization is imposed on a map of the home. You can see the bedroom and the bathroom. And it provides a heat map of the proportion of time spent in the monitored space over a 24-hour period. That allows insights into how much movement is going on, where people are spending most of their time, etc. It's also feasible to combine all of the data. They did 8 weeks of data collection and to look at activity by location in space over the entire monitoring period of 8 weeks. Each circle here represents a day, with day 1 starting at the center. And if you go around, this is the clock and its activity according to time of the day. And again, it's possible to build up an idea of how much time people are spending in bed, engaged in different functional activities in the kitchen, bathroom, and also outside of that environment. So that's an example of how technology may be used in research, and to think about how it may be used and translated to improve clinical management as well. And this is all exciting. But another really important question to ask is, what do people with Parkinson's think of this? And are they prepared to use it? Otherwise, if they're not, then the technology, in fact, won't be adopted. It won't be of any use in the future. So are people prepared to now make that leap? This don't worry about reading the detail on this slide. This study investigated the concept of participant burden in aging technology and research. And what's interesting in particular in this study was that the investigators found that while people are happy to use wearable and communication devices, they were less keen on using video type monitoring and more invasive type technologies. And this is really important to understand. Equally, concerns about the sort of data were that collected information was too personal, and there were also concerns relating to the security and storage of information. And despite the potential, and we've heard this from Rory, there are still another number of challenges to be overcome before we see these wearable digital technology becoming the norm. And those challenges are represented on this slide. Technical validation, that means, does the device measure what it's supposed to measure and do it accurately and reliably? Is it acceptable by the people who are going to use it, and also by the healthcare professionals who interact with it? Does it provide us with information that is clinically useful? Are the data that are collected secure, and is the data processing appropriate? And by regulatory approval, I mean, do the drug agencies approve the use of these technologies to measure the efficacy of new pharmacological drugs? And do health technology assessments at bodies like NICE also approve the use of these sort of technologies? Have they gone through a robust approval process? Because if they don't, then they won't be funded and they won't be adopted and taken up for use. So I'm just going to finish by highlighting 2 very, very large consortia that are really aiming to tackle this issue head on. Mobilised is a consortium funded through the EU, what we call the IMI initiative. And Mobilised aims to deliver a valid solution for real-world assessment of mobility. We're looking at multiple conditions that affect mobility, and Parkinson's is one of them, in order to provide a roadmap to bring digital outcome measures and their use from concept to widespread adoption. So this takes everything from technical validation, those challenges that I addressed earlier, all the way through to regulatory approval. Mobilised is led from Newcastle University, and I'm the co-author of Mobilised. I co-lead it with Ronan Rubinoff from Novartis, and this is a public-private partnership. IdeaFast is another very large IMI consortia that is also led out of Newcastle, and I'm a co-applicant on IdeaFast as well, as it happens. And IdeaFast is also studying people with Parkinson's and aiming to develop real-world tools to measure fatigue and sleep disturbances. And again, looking at the entire piece from device selection through to reliability, through to regulatory approval. These two studies collectively nearly amount to 100 million euros of funding to really try and tackle the problem of adoption. And hopefully we will see that begins to emerge more clearly. And it's hoped that by bringing everything together into a nice connected digital ecosystem that provides important insights for the individual and the clinician and researcher, that we end up with Parkinson's being managed in these robust treatment pathways using digital technology of a variety of forms to improve patient care, and it's more seamlessly embedded into care. So coming back to my point at the beginning, hopefully I've highlighted the promise of digital technology and convinced you that there may be a utility and promise and time for change required. I just want to acknowledge members of my research group who carried out quite a bit of the research, some of the research that I presented today, and also funders of different parts of the research that I presented. And just to say thank you for listening. I don't know if I've got time for one question now. I know that we'll have a panel later and we can take questions.
Thank you, Lynn. That was excellent. Tremendous range of projects that you reviewed with us and explained them in such easy to understand detail. That was fantastic. We are just dead on time, so I think what we'll do, I've got questions from Carol, a couple from Paul, Syndicate, and Diane. I think at this stage we'll hold them until the panel discussion stage. But that was great. That really was, and explained lots and lots of things. And I know from the Fife group how we have so many different people with their Parkinson's. And I remember the freezing. One person who did freeze quite a bit, he unfroze by having a foot put in front of his feet, and then he got going again. Right. Next, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Andrew Kerr from the University of Strathclyde. Andrew's primary research interest is the study of human movement. This has been shaped from many years as a physiotherapist, both practicing, teaching, and researching. Andy's topic this afternoon is rehabilitation technology to support mobility in Parkinson's. And his talk will provide an overview of the rehabilitation technology currently being used in stroke rehabilitation, and discuss how it might be used to help people with Parkinson's. So with my pleasure to ask Andy to give us his paper. Thank you, Andy.
Thanks, John, and thanks, Lynn. That was a really interesting analysis of digital technologies in Parkinson's. I'll just share my screen, and hopefully it's the right one. I'm not going to reveal something you don't want to see about me. How's that? Yeah?
Perfect.
It's okay. Yeah.
You're seeing the slideshow, or are you seeing my
No, it's fine. You've got the slideshow and you in the corner.
Okay, good. So I slightly changed my title when I thought about it the other day to technology to support self-rehabilitation in Parkinson's, and I think that title will become more obvious as I go through the presentation. I'd also like to second Lynn's thanks for the invitation, and I agree this is a really worthwhile project, and we need to work together, I think. Okay, so I thought I'd tell you first a little bit about myself. I like to do this at the start of talks just to give some kind of understanding of where I'm coming from. I am a physiotherapist. I've been around for quite a while now. I trained in Glasgow in the late 80s, I worked in the NHS, mainly in paediatrics, but in several different locations. So I have a good understanding of how the NHS functions in terms of rehabilitation. I've had academic positions in a number of universities as well, where I've mainly been involved in training physiotherapists, particularly in the area of biomechanics. So that is trying to help people understand how people move and why they adopt the strategies that they do. But currently I am with the Rehabilitation Engineering Group at the University of Strathclyde, which is part of the Bioengineering Unit at Strathclyde. And I've been there for 10 years. And I think a lot of it was born, my move to Strathclyde was born from frustration at our lack of engagement with technology in rehabilitation. And that was what prompted me to move to a more engineering academic institution. My research interests are centered around rehabilitation technology, developing and designing them from the very beginning. But I'm also very interested in motor control, particularly during transitions in movement, which is why I came around to looking at Parkinson's. So that's moving from walking to running, moving from standing to walking. And in my case, my PhD was on looking at moving from sitting to walking. Okay, so a little bit about the unit that I work in, the research group that I work with. Rehabilitation engineering has been around since the 1970s at Strathclyde University. It was a real star at the time. I think there's much more departments do this kind of work, but Strathclyde's been doing it for a long time, particularly around the development of tools to measure movement. So things like electromyography, camera-based motion capture systems, virtual reality, that kind of stuff we've been involved in for a long time. But we've also had a look at rehabilitation technologies, and we have a long history of developing electrical stimulators, particularly for spinal cord injury, but also for stroke. Part of our department is in prosthetics and orthotics. So we've been involved in the design of prostheses for amputees, but also orthotics to in neurological conditions like stroke and MS and cerebral palsy in particular. So we've involved a lot of patient groups, but we're always focused on the technology aspects of it, how we can measure the functional impairment and how we can design technologies to help us or help individuals resolve them. And that's a wee picture of our building at Strathclyde. Yeah, it's not the most attractive building, some people think, but I've got a soft place in my heart for it. It looks a bit like Castle Grayskull, I think, from the He-Man, if you remember this. That's what we affectionately call it. But at the moment, it's going through a £15 million refurbishment, which we hope to get back to soon. Anyway, I will move on. So the first thing I'd like to say about rehabilitation technology is that we know that rehabilitation works. Actually, this is the good news. For conditions like stroke, we know that repetitive task training, things like use of virtual reality, constraint therapy are all get really good, well, moderate to good evidence that they work, they actually improve people. Same with cerebral palsy. These rehabilitation interventions are successful in improving the functional recovery of individuals. And in Parkinson's as well, there's been, as we've heard from Lynn already this morning, this is from a review by Tycho Degnan et al. Just a few years ago, where they demonstrated that quality of life overall improves with rehabilitation in Parkinson's. So rehabilitation works. The problem is that there's a limited access to rehabilitation. The WHO did a large kind of consensus report a few years ago in this, when they were looking to improve rehabilitation globally. And they estimate that 75% of the years lost to disability across all different conditions can be improved with rehabilitation. So that's a massive indictment of what we're not doing, because in most cases, the individuals are not getting the rehabilitation that they need, particularly in low income countries. So African, East Mediterranean and Asian regions are estimated to have less than 10% of the staff that they require to meet the rehabilitation needs. But that's not to say that in high income countries like the UK or most Europe, all Europe, are any better. We do have the staff, but we don't actually meet the guidelines for rehabilitation intensity. Our main focus for our centre at the moment is in stroke, and some of the observational studies we've been involved with estimate around 10 minutes a day of rehabilitation that people after stroke receive, instead of the 45 minutes that's recommended by NICE. The population that is needing rehabilitation is increasing. This is good news because this means that people are surviving their stroke, their amputation, or other events like that. They are surviving them, but they are surviving them with disability that requires rehabilitation. Consequently, a lot of governments are, of course, advocating a self-management model for individuals with these long-term conditions, and which is great, and I absolutely agree with it. It gives a lot of, puts the focus on the individuals, and there's a lot of to be said positively about it, but we do need to support individuals to do that, and not just say, you know, off you go, here's a leaflet, and this is what we think you should be doing, and that's it. So rehabilitation technology should be part of the solution. And a rehabilitation technology can do lots of things. And I wanted to make the kind of, we have lots of discussions in our department about the distinction between rehabilitation technology and assistive technology. And we still not got it right, because there's a massive overlap between, and what I think, basically what I mean by rehabilitation technology are technologies that help to recover an individual's capacity, their own capacity to recover, as opposed to an assistive technology, which might replace an individual's ability. So for example, a wheelchair would be an assistive technology. But we still are having that debate, and of course there is a lot of overlap. But rehabilitation technologies, I think, can directly stimulate the neural system. And I'll talk about this in a little minute. They can help to increase the intensity of rehabilitation practice, support self-rehabilitation. We think they can help motivate individuals to conduct their activities, their rehabilitation activities, and also to automate decision-making. And this is something that's been touched on already today, the use of artificial intelligence, or more specifically machine learning, that will adapt recommendations, targets for rehabilitation technologies, so that it removes the requirement for you to attend a physiotherapist or occupational therapist, that this can learn those algorithms for you and make those decisions or support you in those decisions. In stroke, the rehabilitation technologies that we're talking about here are peripheral stimulators. For example, a drop foot stimulator, you can see in the little, now, do I have a wee pointer there? Yeah, I do. Okay. So this little stimulator, which will help the individual with drop foot problem. We also have systems which will stimulate the motor cortex part of the brain using electromagnets to induce currents in different parts of the brain, low voltage currents, I should say. This is an expensive piece of equipment, but you can actually buy these kind of things, well, more direct stimulators on the internet now that I looked earlier, and you can buy them for about £30 on eBay with very little instruction. So, but these are low voltage direct brain stimulators. There's lots of technologies in rehabilitation that will support task-specific practice. For example, robots that we see down here. This is an upper limb robot that will help the individual do some of their arm movements, or lower limb robots that will help individuals practice their walking and their balance if that is required. We can also use video game technology. I'll talk about that a wee minute as well, which some studies demonstrate that it helps motivate people. But I think that's to be discussed, I think, because I think it doesn't always lead to more motivation. In some individuals, perhaps are competitive, but not always the case, I think, from what I understand. I think the self-monitoring is important, and the wearables that Lynn already talked about helps people understand their movement and give progression information on their improvements in walking or balance or whatever. And I think if we're talking about a self-management model, we need to develop the tools that will allow individuals to monitor their own condition, and they need to be user-friendly, etc. So rehabilitation technologies exist. In fact, I think we have a huge arsenal of technologies that we can throw at a lot of conditions, but the problem is people can't access this technology, not just in low-income countries, but in the UK, absolutely. We did a number of focus groups, and I'm not sure if you can see this cut out from a paper that we had a few years ago, which looked at the adoption of stroke rehabilitation technologies, and individuals that we talked to reported problems with, they weren't aware of these technologies. When they were shown how to use them, they couldn't use them because they weren't designed for people with one-arm weakness, hemiplegia. They were far too expensive. So there's loads of barriers to using this technology. The first one there I've put is a cultural barrier that still pervades in UK rehabilitation within the NHS, and the traditional model of rehabilitation is owned by physiotherapists and occupational therapists and speech and language therapists. And we kind of feel in our department that it should be owned by the individuals themselves, you know, so that you have to go to the therapist to receive your therapy. And it's that relationship maybe needs to change, I think. If we are to deliver the volume of and the intensity of rehabilitation that needs to be given to individuals, then we need to give the individuals more of the tools themselves and not rely on this outdated model that we think. Costs are far too high for rehabilitation technologies. Some of those drop foot stimulators that I showed in the earlier slide will cost an individual up to £10,000. The NHS won't, some health boards will, but most won't give you that kind of level of support. Often the design is not user-friendly. We've come across apps for tablets that require you to have two functional hands. Well, that's not very good if you've got a stroke. Individuals need to be trained properly. You know, it takes a lot of time to set up. When we talk to physiotherapists, they say if it takes longer than 5 minutes to set up the robot, for example, they won't use it because they've only got 10 minutes with the individual. So if it takes them that long to set up the technology, they just won't use it. Things are not actually available locally, and often they're not appropriate for home use. We want individuals to do more of their rehabilitation at home. Then we have to design technology that can fit into people's homes. So the image I've got up there in the top right hand of the slide is a sit-to-stand training system, which was developed in South Korea, which is actually, in terms of its engineering, it was fantastic. It detected if the person wasn't able to do the movement themselves, that there was a system of pulleys that would assist them in different directions. So there's lots of sensors everywhere. But the idea that this could be actually used in a clinical environment, it was a non-starter, absolutely. So they've engineered, and I think we have all been guilty of this for a long time in engineering departments. We engineer things for the problem, but we forget that there's an individual out there that has to use it, you know, on a day-to-day basis. So to resolve some of these issues around design of technologies, we've recently been awarded a large grant from the Jules Thorne Trust to start a co-creation centre for rehabilitation technology. it will, lots of fingers and toes crossed. We are hoping to open our doors in May of this year. We've been putting it back and back and back. The idea for the centre basically is that we have the bottom floor of our building that you saw in that first slide is going to be fully equipped with all the rehabilitation technology that we can lay our hands on. So upper limb robots, lower limb robots, virtual reality, we have balanced training systems, we have a whole range of kit. And we are opening our doors for people to come in and use this equipment for an 8-week program of therapy, which is supervised, but there's no hands-on therapy. The individuals themselves will manage what they do. Targets will be set with the therapist, but essentially it's managed by the individual. And what we get is we get their data and we get their opinions on what equipment is good and what's not good, that kind of thing. We will also include our own prototype equipment, such as what you've seen in the slide here. This is our own version, which costs £500 to build. This is to support upper limb movements. It's a system of springs and to lift the weight of the arm if you've got a weak arm after a stroke. And realize I'm talking all about stroke, and I will get onto Parkinson's in a minute. But this will cost £500 to make. And the upper limb robots that you saw earlier, well, the one that we were using in Glasgow was £250,000. So, you know, this could be used and bought by individuals and put in their home, and that's what we're looking at. We're looking at kind of mass, you know, to scale up the technology, we need to reduce the price, I guess. So our mission is to develop a range of technology based on a co-creation approach with users. So they come in, they try it, they tell us what's good, what's bad, but importantly, they give us ideas as well for new technologies. And that the resulting technologies can be made available in community settings. So we've done studies where we have placed our technology in leisure centres in an area beside Glasgow called Lanarkshire. We put them into 5 different leisure centres. We put power assisted bicycles and we encouraged people to use them where they could and give us that feedback. And that was really successful. People could get to the leisure centres. Of course, right now they can't. Which is a problem. But you know, let's imagine a world where gyms are open, shops are open, and universities are open again, and I'm sure that will be the case. I put a little link. It's a very long link here to a press release about our centre. If anyone's interested, I could probably pass that on. If anybody wants to know more about our co-creation centre. So in terms of Parkinson's specific rehabilitation technology, so I guess our focus has always been on really stroke and spinal cord, but we see the same potential in Parkinson's to get involved in rehabilitation technology. This guy, I'm not sure if I'm saying his name right, Abruzzese et al. Had a kind of paper a few years ago where he was trying to generate more ideas and thoughts around the use of technology in Parkinson's. And he said that we need innovation in rehabilitation technology, and absolutely right. And he thought that virtual reality, exert gaming, I'll explain about that in a little second, motor imagery and robot assisted physiotherapy was the way to go. I know that there's some evidence now that this kind of technology does benefit people with Parkinson's. A study that Lynn was involved in, using virtual reality treadmills demonstrated a reduction in the incidence of falls afterwards. This slide here is a dance plate that was used by a group in, I think it was South Korea or Japan, and they demonstrated balance improvements from the game as well. We know that the game things like the Wii and the Microsoft Kinect have been used kind of successfully in Parkinson's. There's been some evidence of cognitive training improvements, improving particularly attention, memory, and the ability to dual task. We heard earlier about freezing of gait, and there's some work around using cue augmenters, so visual or auditory cue augmenters to reduce freezing of gait, and that's something that might be quite interesting. I'm particularly keen on exploiting our leisure centres. I kind of feel that, you know, our Parkinson's and stroke are also taxpayers. They pay for the local leisure centres, but there's huge barriers for them to use them. They're designed for young, healthy people, and they need to be designed for everyone. And I think there is a case for having adapted gym equipment to be used, particularly for stroke and for people with neurological conditions like Parkinson's. So a wee second on virtual reality. This is on the screen here. I hope you're seeing a video of one of our stroke participants walk down a treadmill. Walking down hills is a particular problem with stroke. So this guy's practicing that in a 180-degree virtual reality environment. The screen's moving. And this kind of technology is fantastic because it allows practice of difficult skills in a safe environment. He's wearing a harness that you might see, and there's a person beside him. It can recreate challenging environments. It's a bit like a simulator in that respect. You can recreate street scenes with pedestrians and things. So it's useful for activities of daily living to replicate them and train them. And there's good to moderate evidence in stroke. In Parkinson's, a Cochrane report a few years ago concluded that virtual reality and physiotherapy have similar effects on gait, balance, and quality of life. So, I mean, people think, well, that's not very good. It's the same, it's equivalent. But I think it's really good because it does as good a job as physiotherapy using this virtual reality. For me, that was a good outcome. Same for exergaming. I mean, people use different words here: rehab games, purpose of games, exercise games. But what I'm talking about is these kind of like Wii games and Microsoft games, which are designed for rehabilitation. So they've been demonstrated to be better in 5 studies or similar in 3 studies to traditional rehabilitation, improving motor outcomes using the timed up and go, balance, Baird test, and improving cognitive skills. They're also been shown to be safe and feasible in home scenarios, which again, I think is really important. To deliver intensive therapy in a self-managed model, we have to have technology that will fit into people's houses. And leisure centres, as I said. So this is my last slide here. So we want to do more with Parkinson's in our centre. That's what our kind of hope is. So we received an award, the Research and Action Award from Parkinson's UK to help us do this. So we are going through a series of focus groups. We've done one focus group to look at what kind of technologies people are using, what are the barriers to them using, what are their specific needs for people with Parkinson's, how do we enable more technology and for people with Parkinson's to self-manage their rehabilitation or to increase the amount of rehabilitation that they're doing. So as I said, the first focus group is met. And the second one we will be convening quite soon. Okay, I think I'm running out of time there. Is that right, John? Am I?
Thank you, Andy.
Okay, great.
That's fantastic. Just one quick question in the Q&A box. And Peter has put a question there. Are you aware of the charity REMAP, R-E-M-A-P, which puts clients in need of bespoke gadgets and things? And he thought there'd be some overlap with your work there.
Yeah, we are aware of that group, and one of our engineers in prosthetics actually works with them, designing prostheses for upper limb children with upper limb amputations, I should say. Yeah, so we are aware of that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that. Right, thank you for that 2 excellent presentations. And Andy, I can see opportunities for crossover, you might say, into doing more work with Parkinson's.
Yeah.
And I think your new centre opening in May has probably already won an award for the longest list of characters in an email address, a website address. That was
the university likes, or like all universities, like to keep control of all media outputs. So that's why you have to go to the university to get these URL. Sorry.
Pretty long list of characters there.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention, and thank you for your entries in the question and answer box, and particularly thank you, Lynn, for providing some comprehensive replies. I think you've replied to 9 of the questions so far, which is fantastic. Now it's time for a break. Let's have a 10-minute break, and if you can all be back online at 25 minutes past 3, that would be great. We'll be bringing in our international speaker for the day. So 10-minute break, back at 3:25, please. Thank you. There we go. Welcome back, everybody. My clock on the wall, controlled by Somewhere in Rugby, and my phone, etc., are all saying it's 15:25. So welcome back to the second half of today's seminar. Tonight's this next speaker is our overseas speaker from Berkeley, California. Ray Finucane is a mechanical engineer by training, and Ray's objective is to develop techniques leading to better use of levodopa to manage Parkinson's disease syndromes. Ray's subject this afternoon is model-based treatment of Parkinson's disease. And in his talk, Ray will describe an approach designed to help people with Parkinson's disease provide information to their doctors. There was a paper written by people in the Edinburgh branch on this very topic. And perhaps we'll all share the experience of you go to see the doctor, you open the door, go in, the doctor says, "How are you, John?" And your first response is okay. So the natural follow-up he would have is, what on earth are you doing here? But so it's really all about preparing yourself in a good position to advise the doctor on what your problems are. Being only around about 7:30 in the morning in Berkeley, breakfast time, Ray has recorded his presentation, but we're fairly sure that Ray will join us a little bit later for the panel discussion. So Liz, I believe you've got the video that you're able to play for us.
PD Watch and the development of the model were a collaborative effort that began in 2016, when Rytary first became available to the Parkinson's community. Heiko Mueller, the originator, developer, and intellectual property owner of the PD Watch iPhone application, worked in collaboration with Ray Finucane and Wendy Bomberg on the overall project. The work we describe evolved during development of PD Watch, an Apple iPhone application designed to track a patient's intake of Parkinson's medications, keep a database of reported symptoms, and forecast future need based on recent history. PD Watch presents an analytical approach intended to assist in establishing and adjusting the daily dosage of IPX066, or Rytary, an extended-release formulation of levodopa-carbidopa, prescribed to alleviate symptoms of Parkinson's disease. PD Watch is an Apple iOS application designed to address some of the difficulties encountered by patients with Parkinson's disease and their medical professionals and caregivers. It tracks a patient's intake of Parkinson's medications, keeps a database of the patient's symptoms, and maintains a record of physical conditions that impact symptoms and drug effectiveness. PD Watch provides a summary of objective information to the patient's medical provider, allowing data-based assessment of symptoms. The patient's condition is recorded in a self-report using a UPDRS-based rating scale. The user interface is designed for people with Parkinson's. This slide shows examples of the user interface on the Apple Watch. Currently in an exploratory phase, PD Watch has the potential to increase the stability of a patient's condition and quality of daily life by fine-tuning the administration of available formulations of levodopa. Most testing to date has focused on IPX066 or Rytary and an immediate release form of carbidopa-levodopa or Sinemet, but other drug formulations can be easily accommodated. PD Watch can potentially provide a convenient, accessible data integration platform to facilitate analysis of relationships between drug administration, patient response, and symptom measurements. Enable a patient to create an ongoing database record of symptoms and medication efficacy using widely recognized measurement scales and biometrics for the patient's medical providers for use between appointments and during face-to-face meetings. Provide data to the physician to help determine an optimum medication program based on apparent demand while observing restrictions such as maximum daily dose and adjusting drug administration to take into account the impact of food, exercise, stress, and other variables. The app uses manufacturers' published pharmacokinetic data to calculate the potential effect of Parkinson's drugs. New drugs or new data can be added at any time. The app accesses the personal health database on the iPhone and leverages the health-related data which is collected by the Apple Watch. This small team has produced some new ideas for the treatment of Parkinson's patients based on a mathematical model of serum concentration that we used first for analysis, then for development of a new prescription, the ultimate goal of our model. Analysis shows the impact of the drug upon symptoms. Synthesis looks at the reverse, suggesting a new prescription aimed at producing a specified outcome. Our work provides insight into the enduring mystery that has hindered progress in Parkinson's patient care. What is the relationship between serum concentration of dopaminergic drugs, Parkinson's symptoms, and drug side effects? Here is Ray's initial attempt to come up with the do-it-yourself objective measurement of Parkinson's symptoms. It provided the first positive evidence of the importance of the first derivative of concentration as being a key component of the overall mystery of how levodopa works. The top line, the red line, shows serum concentration of dopamine calculated by our model. Below is a record taken from the Apple Watch heart rate monitor at the same time. There appears to be an obvious relationship between blood pressure and medication taken. At 6 low points of concentration, the red curves coincide with the high points of the pulse rate. These three pictures illustrate the capability of the Empatica E4 wearable sensor to carry out two separate missions. First, we see that typical PD symptoms can be related to signals from existing sensors. Second, the signals are aligned to DC-DT rather than to the magnitude of C, providing support for our central thesis. What happens after you take a pill at 2 a.m. is shown at the right of the dotted vertical line at 2. The 2 a.m. pill event elicits a reliable response, showing what happens physically when a sharp rise occurs. The first symptom category noted is the beginning of panting, uncontrollable rapid breathing. The person with Parkinson's was astonished to observe the EDA and pulse aligned so well on initiation and decay of the abnormal breathing. The Empatica E4 tracks 5 physical responses. 3 show up after the medication was taken: tremor, acceleration, panting, electrodermal activity, and pulse rate symptoms. The chart provides Empatica E4 data following a single dose of 245 milligram Rytary taken at 2 o'clock. This picture shows an heuristic illustration displaying the long-sought connection between concentration and symptoms. The colorful curve across the center of the chart is the model concentration, embellished by the sign of its first derivative. In other words, when the calculated concentration is rising, dc/dt is positive and the curve is colored green. When concentration is falling, the curve is orange. The blue curve on the chart shows the patient's self-reported symptom assessment plotted on the left axis. The observations are discrete reports tracked every 30 minutes. If the value is less than 0, it signifies dyskinesia and is represented by a brown dot. If greater than 0, it is a symptom. The symbol is an X. No simple therapeutic range is discernible from this chart, but a possible statistical solution is shown next. This chart displays the variation of on, off, and dyskinesia as a function of both concentration and slope of concentration. The charts are generated by treating patient reports as categories rather than numerical values. The chart on the left side is appropriate for the lower range of concentration, and the right side is for the higher range. The error bars represent the 95% confidence level. At low concentration, we see virtually no dyskinesia, whereas at high concentration and negative slope, dyskinesia is always observed. Over the last 5 years, we have learned from PD Watch a way to create models that represent the serum concentration of levodopa from an arbitrary prescription, how to use the models to clarify the relationship between levodopa, symptoms, and dyskinesia, how to develop a rational basis for prescription design using non-pulsatile Rytary, a system with low absolute value of dc/dt, and to create regression models that allow prediction of the future pattern of symptoms based on past results. Here are some limitations, disclaimers, and caveats. We have ideas, suggestions, positions of possible interest, but no completed products. There has been no peer review, publication, nor has authoritative approval been sought or granted. While trials have been approved by movement specialists, we have no medical credentials and all data derived from a single patient. We welcome your questions, and if possible, Ray is here and he will answer them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was a very detailed but thorough investigation of a possible development to help people with Parkinson's. I don't see any particular questions in the box at the moment, but hopefully you'll have some questions for Ray when he comes along to join the panel shortly. Looking at the clock, I think it gives us time to get a bit of spare time, which we can put into a longer panel discussion later. So Kyle, if you're ready, it's time to introduce our fourth speaker this evening, this afternoon, in fact. I just hoped the sun was going down. Ray developed his solution after he'd actually been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. Ray, that you've just seen his work described, and he used his skills, expertise, and knowledge to create an innovative app. And indeed, this is an example for patients taking on greater control of their health, a topic that our next speaker will actually elaborate on. So our final speaker is Professor Carl Montague. Carl is an associate professor in computing at Northumbria University, Newcastle. His research addresses critical social problems and challenges by designing and configuring digital technologies that empower individuals and people, particularly people in marginalized communities. Carl's subject this afternoon is democratizing healthcare technologies wearable for people living with Parkinson's. And he will tell us about digital technologies that are rapidly transforming the healthcare. We've already seen that in earlier presentations this afternoon, leading to a new breakthrough, hopefully in treatment and cures. So it's with great pleasure I hand the floor over to you, Kyle.
Thank you very much. Can I just double check that you can see my slides okay and everyone can hear me, yeah?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect, thank you very much. Yeah, really great to be here today, so thank you very much for the invite. Before I jump into my talk, I thought it might be useful just to give a bit of background and a bit of context to me, and thanks for the introduction there, John. So I am a human-computer interaction researcher based at Northumbria University here in Newcastle upon Tyne in the UK. I'm co-leading the Northumbria Social Computing Lab, and our group are interested in the design of socially responsible digital technologies, and the sort of direction that our work, or the way we talk about our work, is that it takes what's called a human-centered design approach, human-centered design. So just up on the screen are some examples of projects that I've worked on in the past with students and collaborators. But human-centered design, for those that aren't aware of this, essentially what we're focusing on is the needs and abilities of end users and stakeholders of technologies. So we are socially engaged, and it's about trying to address these critical social issues, and we're sort of concerned with recognizing not the sort of typical use of technology, but thinking actually about the diversity of the users of technology and the very diverse needs that they might have of those technologies as well. And actually sort of jumping on some of the terms talked about earlier on with our other speakers. So Andy mentioned co-creation. So co-creation and participatory design are a sort of key tool and approach that we take as well. So looking at how we can actively involve people in the design process as experts in their own right to sort of design and create these technologies, just as we heard as well from Ray there. And another thing that's sort of key and important to us is around this situated and responsive approach, this place-based approach. So working with the communities, these neighborhoods, very much about being embedded. So we don't tend to think about our research as taking place necessarily in the university and in the lab, but actually it tends to be something that happens out in the community, in the real world, and set within these real world contexts. And as John sort of given this sort of introduction for what my interests are and my own research agenda. So within that space, I'm really interested in inclusive design and innovation processes. So for me, it's really about not just how do we create accessible technologies and allow people to access those tools and those services, but actually how do we democratize the tools and processes by which we start to design and provision these technologies and services that shape our society and ultimately influence our own lives. And today I'm going to talk about that democratization process in the context of healthcare technologies. Can't see the slides clearly. Oh, sorry, are they not coming through? Okay. I'm not sure what I'm doing.
And Kyle, I think it was maybe just the early ones that were
apologies.
Great.
Okay.
I think probably now they'll be fine.
Okay, hopefully they're all right now. Let me know if not, and I can slow down as well. So in the background here, I've been frantically redoing my slides actually based on what my other speakers have said. I'm in a very fortunate position today that actually I'm last in the lineup, which means that actually a lot of the heavy lifting has been carried out beautifully by the other speakers. So they've already motivated you by the the exciting things that have been happening in digital technologies and the direction that we're heading in the coming years as well. So just a sort of quick recap, I guess. So Lynn talked about this shift between what was possible at home now and what we can do in the everyday, and how digital technologies actually has embedded this really rich monitoring capabilities of technologies at home, and how that's began already to change the way that we interact with healthcare professionals, and hopefully leading to greater monitoring and understanding of Parkinson's in the future as well. Andy gave us a really nice glimpse into the future of rehabilitation therapies, and actually I'm buzzing and excited about actually this new centre, this co-creation project that he's about to kick off as well. So mentioning here about the importance of the self-motivation, and this actually relates to, I think, one of the questions we had here about the sort of benefits as well. So thinking about actually how do you as the community start to benefit from this research, and I think that's a really important thing, and hopefully something that I can touch on in my talk today. And then finally, we're Ray's and Wendy as well. I think this one here, for me, it really hits home. This is an incredible demonstration, actually, of what today's consumer technologies are capable of. I can appreciate that there's been a lot of effort and a lot of work gone into that by Ray and the team. But actually, what we're talking about here is technology that you can buy today from any sort of major store, and how actually that's transforming the way that we start to think about health, and in theory, actually, how we start to treat it in a very sort of hyper-personalized mode of delivery there as well. So as I say, I think these are wonderful examples of well-designed digital technologies, and clearly the teams behind those that have sort of worked very closely with people with Parkinson's to really understand the challenges and to make sure that they get the design of those right. Now, unfortunately, that's not always the case, and this isn't always the way that digital innovation takes place. Often what we find actually is that the number of people actually who are responsible for the creation of a new digital technology or a digital innovation tends to be quite small, and actually tends to be a sort of niche category of individual, and they're not necessarily well connected with actually the end user, those final stakeholders who are going to be either subjected to the implications of that technology or adopters of that technology as well. And what I'm really interested in, as I say, is how we sort of rethink those processes. So I've got a rather trivial example. So if we simplify the process by which we think about new technologies coming into existence into this timeline, what we have is this sort of what is possible at the initial point, the sort of starting point, the conceiving the ideas. We have this huge scope and influence and direction. And then as we start to progress and as we move through time, we make decisions about actually the technology itself and the innovation and that pipeline that we're following. And with each decision, we start to narrow down then that sort of flexibility or the new directions, the new possibilities then for that particular innovation, that technology. And as we continue to do this, we funnel down further and further and further until the point that actually we have very little wiggle room. And what we have then is this end technology, this final thing. And that is the sort of done technology. And usually what a lot of us tend to see is then the product that comes out of that, with very little scope for change at all. Now, the unfortunate thing with that, and as we heard from Andy, I think when he was talking about, even the leisure centres, they're not necessarily being these inclusive places. And what that can ultimately mean is that we end up with a technology that isn't actually what we needed. And for a lot of communities, and I think Parkinson's in particular is one where digital technologies and recent innovations such as touchscreen technologies have demonstrated a disregard actually for some of these sort of very fundamental needs to access and use the devices. And with that, they've created new barriers and challenges for people then as well. And a lot of this is down to the point at which we engage with users, the point at which actually not the individuals who are creating, the engineers, the designers, the developers, it's the point that when they start to work with people, that starts to then limit, as I say, this opportunity for wiggle or shift in direction and possibility. And what I'm really interested in, what my research tries to sort of speak to, is actually how we can start to then shift that back up. So how do we get everyone and with that, anyone and everyone involved in these sort of design processes, or at least enable them to be able to participate and engage in this process if they want to, and for them to be then not only the ones that are accessing these technologies, but actually the ones that are shaping those technologies and making the decisions about them. And as I say, with that, that's the sort of framing I've got here. So it's not just about trying to make these technologies accessible to people and usable, but actually it's about reshaping those processes and as to how we actually create them, and trying to actually engage the community themselves as creators of these new interventions and innovations, as we saw from Ray's presentation there. So ultimately, I guess my goal is to get rid of me, and that's the mark of success. If I'm no longer needed as a researcher, then it means then that these tools and these processes have been democratized, and actually there's no longer a need for me to come along and to work with people to design these. They will be able to achieve that and do that for themselves. And as I say, I think that's quite a nice goal to have, to do myself out of a job. So I've got a couple of slides here. So the next one here is just around sort of sources of inspiration for me and behind this work. So one of the sources of inspiration for me was a site called Patients Like Me. If you've never been on it before, it started out as a design of a social network, a place where people living with conditions could find other individuals living with those same conditions, as a place then to hear about their experiences, to share ideas, best practices, and just actually to have another social network, a social support for people that understood what they were going through. And what was really exciting to me, and what I started to learn as I dug further into the Patients Like Me website, was to learn about actually some of these community-led activities that were going on in these spaces. So it quickly transformed, and it wasn't just about actually talking about and reflecting actually on the condition, but actually you had people within those communities. I imagine Ray would be a great example of this, who are tinkering with technology and actually trying to create and come up with new ideas for themselves, and doing a lot of this self-experimentation. So these N of 1 studies. And this has become a big part of the Patients Like Me website. It's under the Digital Me is the section it's called. And it's around actually how they support and engage in these patient-led research activities. Now, one of the things that you'll read, and if you see some of they've published lots of papers, and in fact, a lot of them have sort of challenged and contested research that's come out about new drug treatments or therapies as well. And the really exciting thing here has been that sort of collaboration between the community and also researchers alongside that as well, in terms of disseminating this information. But one of the things that struck me when I was sort of reading through these papers and reading through the stories was around actually the practices that were going on within the communities. So it was this very inspired sort of make, do, and mend. It was a case of people taking advantage of what they had around about them and what was available to try and sort of shoehorn a study protocol or collect the data that was needed in order to have that conversation and to do it. So it wasn't that they had necessarily access to the right technologies or the right tools or the right processes, but they found a way through it. So examples where, repurposing off-the-shelf Fitbit devices and technologies, creating their own diaries and patient logbooks, and then with that, trying to wrestle tools like Excel and whatnot to create these charts and representations, or working with other people within those communities to try and then communicate and understand this. And I think the exciting thing, or the interesting thing here, is the opportunity for us as digital technologists and researchers is not necessarily for us to come along and say, right, we're going to do those ideas or we're going to support you with these things, but actually thinking about how do we enable and empower those communities to be able to do this more easily and more effectively. So how can we provide them with the infrastructures that they need in order to continue to do this and to do this more effectively, not just as N of 1s, but to quickly and rapidly scale up into these sort of larger community-driven studies as well. And I think a lot of this comes down to, as I say, the sort of design of some of these technologies. So we have things like, as I say, these fitness trackers, which have been designed with a particular user in mind. That they've come from Silicon Valley. They've been designed for the typical athlete in Silicon Valley. That mindset of it's about running and monitoring running. And it starts to sort of ignore anyone who doesn't fit that generic mold then of who are you as a person and what are your abilities. And with that, it means then that we start to create these exclusions or these challenges and these barriers to actually how people can then make use of those technologies. There's a really exciting piece of work that's been going on for a couple of years now out of Carnegie Mellon University. So there's a researcher there called Patrick Carrington, and his PhD was focused around understanding the quantified self within wheelchair athlete space. So trying to understand actually the role of digital technologies and these logging devices, these fitness trackers for wheelchair athletes. And one of the things that his work talks a lot about is obviously this mismatch between the existing offering of these fitness trackers to actually what is required and needed. So it's not just the fact that the sensing algorithm is measuring steps instead of actually the rotations of their wheelchairs. That's definitely something that's an issue. But it's also even down to the questions that the interfaces are answering. So the processing on the data, and is it actually speaking to them, and does it relate then to the things that they're interested to understand and monitor about themselves? And likewise with that, then the visualizations and the representation of that data and how they start to understand their own performance and improvements in that performance as well. So he and his team have taken a really interesting approach where they've built their own wearable device that's designed specifically for wheelchair users, wheelchair athletes. And with that, they're starting to build a sort of platform and an infrastructure around that would allow these athletes to start to capture and work with this data for themselves. And with that, it will hopefully then start to lead to new understanding and new breakthroughs in the sort of research space as well. So if I can now bring us back into the Parkinson space, and actually I'm going to talk about some work that took place in Newcastle University. So this actually started prior to me joining Newcastle. So I joined in 2016. This was a technology that was being led by one of the researchers, Roisin McNanny. So she was originally a speech and language therapist, and she was working with clinicians who are specialized in Parkinson's, as well as designers and engineers, so hardware and software engineers. But the really important thing is that she was working with local Parkinson's support groups here in Newcastle as well. And actually the work they were looking at was they were trying to understand, it was these sort of co-design workshops and focus groups, trying to understand actually, well, what are the key challenges or the biggest impacts for people living with Parkinson's? So where is it that actually the symptoms and the disease become problematic and challenging for them in daily life? And then with that, trying to work with them to sort of design bespoke technologies that might respond to that. And one of the interesting devices that resulted from this is the development of this PDQ device. So it was targeting the challenge of drooling and the fact that actually there's a sort of reduction in automatic swallowing in a number of people living with Parkinson's. And this obviously causes social embarrassment from time to time. And it was one of the barriers that people said that put them off actually going out often as well and engaging with other people. And what they ended up designing and creating here was, as I say, a small wearable device that could be worn in the wrist. It looked like a normal watch without like a display or anything. And it had a little vibrotactile motor in it and a single on-off switch. And what the device allowed them to do was to turn on, by clicking the button, they could turn on the device and it would activate a sort of periodic vibration on the wrist. And every time they felt that vibration, that was a prompt or a cue for them to swallow. And the intention here was to try and, yes, we can't repair the automatic swallowing, but what we can do is hopefully augment or support through another type of cue. And that's what they were doing with this device. And I'm particularly excited about this work because actually it's a great demonstration of what can happen and what can be created if we have the right team at the start. So here they had, as I say, a combination of people who were living with the condition, who had that lived experience and knew exactly what the sort of challenges and barriers were for them. And they were able to work directly with specialist engineers, both from sort of software and hardware and designers, to create something that addressed that challenge for them and worked for them. So this was a huge achievement. And you know, and going back to sort of Andy's numbers and price brackets, you know, this thing here, they created this thing for about, I think maybe £100 for a unit. So, you know, it's not super cheap given that it's quite limited in what it does, but at the same time, it's an affordable intervention. And what was really exciting as well is, as the result of this, it led on to then a clinical trial that sort of compared and looked at the effectiveness of this cueing method compared with other therapies and other treatments as well. So I think, as I say, what was really exciting here is that it's a sort of research in reverse. It didn't start from we're running a trial, we've got a technology, and how can we then make this something that actually the Parkinson's community can then benefit from? How do we translate this back into a product or a device for you? Instead, this started the other way around, where it's actually, well, what would be a meaningful technology that could support you? And then actually that's what's informing and driving the research. And I think this kind of relates as well to one of the questions we had around, you know, how do you get involved in research? And I think what we want is for everyone who's interested to be involved in research can get involved in research. And I think for me in particular, I'm really interested in anyone who has a research idea being able to execute that idea and actually try these things for themselves. So this brings me then to the technology I want to talk about today. So I mentioned I joined this lab in Newcastle in 2016. And when I joined, we started working on the next generation of that device. What we have in front of you here, this is called the Axle PD, and essentially it's built on a new generation of hardware technology, because obviously technology rapidly evolves and changes. So this is adopting what was the sort of the standard in terms of these fitness trackers at the time. And we have an accelerometer, we've got Bluetooth communication, it has that vibro-tactile motor so we can still deliver those cues. And as I say, the interesting thing here is that we've been able to get the cost down, because actually the cost of that technology has come down significantly. So this device that was previously £100, we could now produce and sell for less than £20. And the one other really exciting thing, and for me, as I say, I think this is the crucial part in order for us to start to think about a democratized healthcare technology, is that actually the new generation here, the new device, it's not shipped with the final software. It's shipped and it can do something and it has a functionality, but actually this has been designed that you can reprogram it, so you can change its purpose. You can rewrite the code that runs on that device to make it do something else and make it work for a different thing. So the really exciting thing here is that actually, if we think about that funneling in, we've made a number of decisions about the hardware that can change. But actually, the really fascinating and exciting thing here is that because the software itself can be rewritten and we can change the algorithms that run on the device, it's possible for us to update this. So as new algorithms are discovered, so I think Lynn mentioned around sort of tracking sleep, for example. So if tomorrow somebody discovers a new, more appropriate algorithm for tracking sleep in people with Parkinson's, it would be entirely possible to push an update and change that. The other thing here is thinking about actually not that you have a device that has a single purpose or single use, but actually how does that device actually start to support the different activities that go on in your life. So you imagine at that 6-month point, you go into the doctors, you bring with you the data that Ray's talked about in terms of what's been happening with your behavior and symptoms for the last 6 months. And then actually in that appointment, they'd like to do an observation, take you through those clinical assessments. So what we could imagine here is that actually their computer would connect with your band, tell the device to start streaming raw data from the device straight to their computer, and then actually go through then the assessment, both with them observing you, but also with their machine collecting that data. And then when it's done, it reverts back to its previous mode of just capturing your regular movement and physical activity data and cueing and prompting for you for swallowing. And this is the exciting thing, by being able to sort of update what the device does over the air and in real time, we have the ability to start to think about new use cases and new scenarios then for this device. Rounding off quickly, I promise. So one of the other things that I want to talk about that we have been doing, and in fact this touches back into Lynn's presentation, it's really important that when we bring out any new digital technologies, that actually we make sure that they do what we claim they do, and that actually we can trust the information that we're getting from those, so the sensed values from the devices. So one of the things that we've done already with this device is we've performed that technical validation. So we've looked actually at the signal response from the device itself against the gold standard, and in fact the devices that I think Lynn and our team use quite a lot, the AX3s. And we've been able to demonstrate that there's no significant difference in the data. So here we have a device that costs a fraction of the price. I think the AX3 might be 5 or 6 times the price of this to purchase. But yet it gives comparable results. And then actually the group, the Lazish research group that we're working with in Lisbon, and I should say as well, all the team here, we're all involved also in the IdeaFast project as well that Lynn mentioned. So the Lazish research team have actually also been doing some validation studies with people with Parkinson's and using these clinical assessments. However, I won't go into too much details because I do know that Tiago Guerreiro, he's actually coming to the session in March, so he'll be presenting the session. So I don't want to steal his thunder. I'll make sure that he can tell you about that. However, what I will say is the early results on that are showing here that there's no significant difference in the performance of our Axle PD device, and as I say, those sort of gold standard in terms of the research data devices. And this is really exciting because what this means now then is that we're confident that the use of the signal data from this, whether it's run from a study by researchers and professionals, or whether it's studies run by people within the Parkinson's community themselves, we can trust the validity of the data that's coming from this. And actually it's in a form that these existing tools and algorithms can work with that data set as well. We've been careful to make sure that we're following those same standards as well. And I'm really excited to announce, and this is fresh. In fact, I don't even know if I'm officially allowed to say it, but I will anyway. We just received funding, so a notification that we were awarded funding from Parkinson's UK as part of their non-drug approaches for a sort of new phase, a new study that will take part this year. And this is for wearables for people with Parkinson's to manage drooling. So we're specifically using the funds here to finalize the design of this technology, get everything CE marked, and be in a position that actually it can be shipped as a product or a technology for people living with Parkinson's. The idea with this 18-month study is that we will work with people with Parkinson's. So working with 3,000 people with Parkinson's across the UK, who will help us to co-design and refine the sort of design, the decisions, and ultimately the tools and technologies that will sit alongside this technology, this band, as well as then a sort of in the wild evaluation then of the queuing and the use of the device itself. And with that, everything that we're producing is going to be made completely open source. So all the hardware, all the software is open source. The intention here is that if we have a finished design and service here, then that's something that could be produced hopefully by Parkinson's UK and sold or made available very, very cheaply. As I said before, £20 is what we reckon that this could be delivered to somebody's door. So that's the complete manufacturing postage cost. And I think one of the other key things that we're trying to do with this as well is to try and make this a sort of standalone technology, because we recognize that there's a lot of people who don't necessarily own or use a smartphone. So we're really keen to sort of work with the community to design this in a way that it can also be a standalone device that doesn't rely on that smartphone device, that technology. With that, I will say, other parts that we are looking at is the sort of configuration of those behaviors, looking at how we can support additional features and functionalities. So we've heard a lot about sort of prompting for medication. That has been a sort of really important thing as well. And then for me, the really big one is this idea of understanding the types of information that you would like to learn about yourself through that technology and through that device, and how we can start to sort of design that into it. So creating these sort of bespoke tools and interfaces that will help you understand about that data. And with that, even thinking about the type of information that you might want to record yourself and capture yourself. So we've had a question here about, some information that we maybe don't have sensors for. So I think it was constipation. This is something that we don't have sensors for today, but there's nothing to say we couldn't design a self-reported scale or diary through this technology that would allow you to sort of capture that alongside other data points. And perhaps at some point in the future, we might arrive at a process for how we can identify those and answer those questions. So my last slide before I wrap up, and it's just to give you a bit of a timeline. So this is sort of provisional at the moment, but the objective here is that we start in April. We've got, as I say, a prototype already, but we want to get the website launched and open this up for anyone with Parkinson's to contribute ideas and give input. We'll then do some co-design activities specifically with people here in the UK as well, and begin manufacturing late, so November this year, with the aim to actually get these devices out and deployed in February next year, and in the hands then of people that start using it, where we can do our evaluation. And the last thing I will say as well is, here we've sort of designed this to be a product or a service for the Parkinson's community. However, the really exciting thing is actually to think about the potential for this to become then that infrastructure that might enable new types of research or future activities and future innovation. So I very much see this as the starting point. So that August 2022, although that's the end of this funded piece of work, that will be the start then of hopefully this shift in the way that we start to think about healthcare technologies and healthcare research as well. So thank you very much. I appreciate your time today, and I'll happily take any questions that might be there as well.
Thank you so much, Carl. That was excellent. If you can close the screen down now.
Apologies. Sorry, dog's going nuts as well.
It's your dog as well, is it?
Yeah, 3 of them in here.
Thank you, Carl. That was excellent. As you were talking, I have memories of my first Fitbit, which was a very small piece that you put on your belt. And I was trying to record the distances that I was walking, etc. And I vividly remember occasionally I got, 15 minutes down the road and forgot to put it on my belt. And I vividly remember sitting watching television that night, shaking it until it registered the sort of distance I thought I'd worked. So I was kind of cheating the system a bit there. but that was great and exciting. Your new news. So that's, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of 4 outstanding presentations. And I should have said more formally, thank you to Wendy for delivering Ray's speaker talk. And I'm sure Wendy and Ray will be on screen soon for you all to part of the panel discussion. So that's the end of the presentations, and it's now time for the podium discussion, where we'll be joined by the speakers, and Ray and Wendy, and we'll also be joined by Werner Emily, who's the brainchild of this event and the next 2 events coming up in February and March, and Mark van Grieken, that you heard at the beginning, who's the chairman of the Dundee Research Interest Group. What I suggest now is if you set your screens, members of the audience, to the grid rather than the gallery view, rather than the speaker's view, that's the way it will work. Before I get on to the panel, we've had quite a few questions which have come up, and a number of them have already been answered in the Q&A box, and I thank the speakers for doing that. A very simple question that most of you talked about, working with people with Parkinson's and getting your results. Can you just say a few words about how you get these people, how you select the people for your clinical trials? Anybody like to comment on that?
I can talk about our new study.
Yeah.
So the project itself, the proposal, was in collaboration as well with the SIGPAC group, and what we're really keen to do actually is to invite anyone. So people are on the line today, anyone at all. We're going to sort of advertise that through the Parkinson's UK portal and things as well. For this one, it's quite a nice study in that actually we're going to post it to people at home, so that it's entirely done from home. So from that point of view, it's a relatively straightforward study. There's no need for you to be close to us in location or come in or anything. And I would say that's probably one of the sort of common challenges and barriers, I guess, for some of these research is your sort of locale in relation to where the studies are happening. But as I say, I'm pleased to announce that certainly for the device trial, we're going to post those out to people. The website will be open internationally, so anyone who wants to contribute ideas and tell us about actually daily challenges and suggestions, we'll have, as I say, an open platform for this ideation. So that'll be invited anyone at all that can participate for that one.
Okay.
I could comment as well. I
Please.
mean, generally, we try and advertise as widely as possible. So, and recruitment takes place through clinics, through adverts, posting on the project on websites. It goes through the National Institute of Health Research. Projects are often logged there, and if they're adopted, people can come through to the project through that. And I know that Liz may want to comment from PD UK's perspective, but there are also trials registries available that where individuals can see what trials are going on in their area and contact the researchers to indicate that they want to take part.
Okay. Anybody else? I've got a very brief question here, which I don't understand, but that's not surprising. It was from Julia, and it said, will NHS ever have the ABU? And I think, Joe, you were going to volunteer yourself to answer that one. You're muted at the moment, Joan.
I just wanted to check with Julia if she would like to ask that question, because some of it got lost. It was in during the first presentation.
I'm sorry, I'm not understanding what you said.
I think Julia might like to ask that question because the bulk of it got lost. That's why it's not clear what the question was about. Oh,
okay.
I kind of guessed it was have the ability to deliver the rehabilitation.
Yeah, I think so.
I filled in the blanks. No, yeah. I think.
Okay. Fair enough. There was another one from Julia, which came in slightly earlier. Welcome, Ray. We heard Wendy present and hello, Wendy. We heard Wendy so eloquently present your work, and thank you so much for joining. Is the sun up yet with you? I mean, it was dark when I last spoke to you.
The sun is up.
Sun is up. That's great.
Beautiful day in California.
All right. I've got a question here. There's a question here from Carol, and her question is, are there wearables to monitor mood and other psychological symptoms? Who would like to go with that one? So talking about wearables, Lynn, please.
Monitor mood.
Lynn?
Not that I know of. I'm sure there's something, but we don't have anything like that, you know, looking at wearables that Ray has used. I don't think Empatica has that. I mean, there may be things that are co-occurring where if you have a low mood, other things will show up, but mood per se, I don't think so. Somebody
Okay.
else would know.
I can maybe comment.
Yes, Lynn.
There's a lot of interest in technology to monitor cognitive changes, so memory changes, all of those sort of things. And clearly there are different areas that are contributing in this space, from passive types of technology that would do something like monitor interaction with keyboard typing and technology, and they sit passively in the background, to more specific apps that would run on a smartphone. So it is an area where there's a lot of development going on. It's a very active space. It's not an area where there's an accepted tool that everybody has adopted yet. And I think that is a fair description of really everything that we've talked about today, they're all active spaces: rehab, monitoring, a whole raft of different symptoms as well, but it's things that have still not stepped across that translational boundary into everyday use, the ubiquitous tools. In fact, the tools are ubiquitous. We have them. I'm sitting with my phone next to me. They're there, but it's actually the ubiquitous use for those specific things. And that's the next big challenge.
Okay.
I was just going to add to that. I mean, Lynn's absolutely right. I mean, I think there's lots of studies, and in fact, Dr. Yu Guan, one of the researchers from Newcastle University, was part of the Idea Fast. One of the strategies they are looking at, and he's been doing for a number of years, is looking actually at trying to understand and reason around the sort of text that people type on things like social networks as ways to try and identify these sort of changes in that cognitive behavior as well. And I do know that the sort of keyboard, that passive keyboard capturing, is one of the things that we are working on. And in fact, it's been led by the Lazish research group I mentioned here as part of the Idea Fast project. So that will hopefully be something that we'll start to see some new evidence and new data around people with Parkinson's as well as a result of that.
Okay. Andy, a personal question for me. You talk about sports centers and what they can do in various activities you're involved with. I vividly remember when I took over the chairmanship of the Fife branch, I went along to the local sports center and sat down with the person in charge and said, "What can you do for people with Parkinson's?" And her and her friends slightly shuffled on their seats and said, "Well, we haven't got anything." I said, "We've got this though," and it was dedicated exercise. And it listed people with things like stroke recovery. And they shuffled on their seat because they suddenly realized there was a great relevance to Parkinson's. And I mentioned the Parkinson's lead nurse, and within 24 hours, the person from the sports center had been to see the lead nurse for Parkinson's and rejigged the whole application form and set it up. Now, that was really me going along and inquiring and providing the link. Do you think that's a problem across the UK of a patchy covering for people from sports centres?
Yeah, definitely. I think the leisure centres are a huge opportunity to deliver more rehabilitation across across everyone that needs rehabilitation, not just Parkinson's, and they do bits. So you'll go along to leisure centres and they'll offer you strength and balance type classes, mainly pitched at older adults. And they do really well with cardiac rehabilitation. That's been a huge success. So the final stage of cardiac rehabilitation is entirely delivered in leisure centres. It's phase 4. So there is a model there, but they just can't get it right. They tried in Lanarkshire to open up to a stroke specific kind of exercise class. And in a population, quite a large population of stroke survivors in Lanarkshire, I can't remember how many there are at the moment, but thousands anyway, they got 5 across something like 7 leisure centres. They just couldn't persuade the people in because I think there's not just the equipment isn't there, it's also a cultural thing. When you go into a leisure centre, it's all targeted at young adults, all the imagery, all the the processes, and they just haven't got it right. There's a few examples in Scotland of where they've got it right, and we're working with them. There's one up in Forth Valley at Falkirk, and they've installed pieces of equipment, power-assisted equipment to get people with significant disabilities, get them started on the process. And I think once you get started on some equipment, then who knows where that leads to. And that was what we found with our stroke trial with leisure centres. We finished it 3 years ago, and we recruited, I think it was 80 odd people to the centres with people with stroke, and the majority are still going to the leisure centres. So that's good business for the leisure centres. Leisure centres are under threat from budget gyms. So your average leisure centre, council leisure centre, will cost you about £30 to £35 a month. And the budget gyms are offering it for £12 or £15. But they are much highly trained. They give you supervision. So the gyms are now focusing on more so on these special populations, as they describe them. People that need supervision, people that need more support. So I think they've got a business case to deliver rehabilitation.
Yeah.
Does that answer the question?
Okay.
It's a bit of a rant, so sorry.
It's fine, yeah. Another question which came up, and it's a fairly simple question, and it said, it was part of the question about how you selected for research, because the person was also saying, what's the benefit of early diagnosis? Which I thought was an interesting question. Would anyone like to sort of take that one on board? Lynn?
In fact, I answered that in text format as well, so hopefully that's come up.
Yeah.
The benefit of early diagnosis is that firstly, the right treatment is delivered to individuals, that there are networks of support that people can be linked into for provision of information, which is really important to reassure. Early advice about exercise. In fact, we've just been talking about different ways to exercise. You don't, in the early stages of Parkinson's, it's not necessary in a lot of cases to have adapted programs because people have already got their own exercise routine. So early advice about continuing or starting an exercise, a more active-based lifestyle. So, and these are very good approaches to really effectively manage symptoms over the longer term. But if we think also about a lot of promising research that's going on now to look at treatments, neuroprotective treatments to protect and preserve the brain, then in order to deliver those, you need to deliver them as early as possible. And the trials need to start taking place as early as possible. And that means we need to have the tools or the biomarkers that they're often called, but the measures to identify people and identify them accurately so that we can then, it's feasible to carry out those trials in the right people. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you for that. You've all talked about funding for your projects, etc. And if Ray and Wendy will forgive us, you probably know that the UK has just left the European Union, and there's a question came up about any research sources of money that may or may not still be available? Is that influence, is that impinged on any of your work?
So, I mean, in terms of that, I know that Lynn addressed this one already. A lot of the European funding, actually, the UK has paid up, and we're eligible to still go for those, and that'll continue for us for some time. There is also other programs beyond the traditional IMI and Horizon funds. And I think, if I'm right in saying as well, I think that there's a lot of efforts being made within the academic community to try and ensure that we can still participate to some degree in some of these projects as well. But not least, there will be new funding streams that are growing here internally in the UK as well. And we're finding actually with that, I mean, I was on a conversation just last week actually with the British Embassy from Portugal around some new grants and funds they have that are specifically trying to re-establish some of these new relationships as well. So I think that there are new bits and bobs coming up, but I think Lynn might have some things to say as well.
Well, you can imagine the anxiety of being a consortium lead for a large IMI project with Brexit, which is basically dangled over our heads from the study starting. And we've literally had this going on in the background. So thankfully, a deal was reached. And by reaching that deal, it kept us in. Allowed us to continue to engage in research, and it's essential for the science. I mean, it would be a loss to the EU if Great Britain wasn't involved, but equally the other way around as well. So it is a huge relief. And as Carl said, there'll be other forms of funding, hopefully, that or maybe more money that goes into those funding streams that we can access. But it is a particularly challenging environment at the moment. Funding has taken a really serious knock with the impact of COVID. So we're all really holding our breath and seeing what happens in the future.
Fair enough. A similar question from Jane on funding. Jane says, great talks by Ray and Kyle. You always get worried when someone starts a sentence that way, but great talks by Ray and Kyle, but can't understand why a bigger study with the PD watch, especially in the USA, hasn't yet attracted necessary funding. Would you like to deal with that? Everyone's gone quiet at this stage.
Some of our work not attracted more funding. It's probably our fault. Not to put it out there. We haven't gotten to that phase yet.
Asked for any funding.
Yeah, we never even asked for it. So I mean, Ray's been working as an engineer and a scientist rather than a publicist and what's needed for the next phase, I think. And also, it has to go beyond just this one patient. But it's a complicated app, and we need buy-in from the medical profession, which, I mean, we have our own struggles with that too, dealing with medical bureaucracy and where is there a yes to something innovative like this? So a lot of reasons, but I think.
I need to write a paper on the subject too.
Well.
Let's see if I can get something published.
Yeah, there's a lot more to go before we can say, there should be more support. But I think somebody else at this point needs to grab it and run with it.
Okay.
And, if someone is interested, maybe.
So can I add to that?
Andy, you want to come in?
What was that, Kyle?
Andy,
I think there's an interesting thing here, because actually a lot of the time, when we talk about these things, we very much think about these top down, this idea that we have to apply, secure the funding in order to go and do the research and then to achieve these outcomes and to have the evidence that we need to sort of speak about it. I think one of the things for me that I found so exciting and refreshing in sites like Patients Like Me, and in fact, in a lot of ways, the Parkinson's UK support groups as well, is these self-experimenters, these hackers themselves who create their own little technologies and tools and run their N of 1 study and report it in a way that somebody else can jump on that. And for me, and I think in a lot of ways, that's really what I want to try and captivate and jump on, is actually how do we do this bottom up? So rather than, because I mean, the delays to getting funding can be significant, and I'm sure all my speakers here with me today will talk about actually the delays that we face with this as well. And actually, what is then the barrier to us joining up some of these N01s and doing sort of community-based activities and studies as a way to try and propel that and move that forward, and to jump not from, right, we need an initial pilot study, to the fact that we might already have that pilot data that's been collected under controlled study conditions. But yeah, I mean, I think the suggestion for the particular organization, charity, the Michael J. Fox, I think is a wonderful one. And in fact, I think this speaks quite well to a lot of the studies that they do fund as well. So maybe something for the future. But equally, I think you just trying to get a few mates to follow it and do it, and to try and grow it that way, more organically, from within the community as well, would be exciting. I see lots of hands, so I'll stop. Sorry.
I think Lynn wants to come in on this topic as well. Lynn?
I think it's great. I mean, over the years, I'm always impressed by the inventive nature of my Parkinson's patients, and also people that have been engaged in research. There's no shortage of ideas, and that's great to seed ideas and what we would, I guess, we'd call concepts that are, have value to take forward. But I can talk from experience in Mobilize and also IdeaFast to get these are just, if you we're wanting to develop tools that will be used in research that measure things that are important to patients, they have relevance, they're useful, they give us important information about a clinical status and progression, etc. That's a huge process to do that, because you have to then have a massive body of evidence that shows that the device that you're using actually measures what it's supposed to be measuring. So we call that technical validation. One of the issues in this area is there's never enough technical validation. So people will produce studies, and there's lots and lots of studies out there, but you actually really need to have very robust validation that takes place in the right population of the right age in the right environment, and the data are there and transparent, and the algorithms, the tools are also available in an open format. I think Kyle talked about this with his research. And the community, the whole development community now has realized and learnt this, and is now really coming together in these massive collective efforts. And that's what is needed. This is a multidisciplinary effort of engineers, clinicians, artificial and computer scientists. I could list off a whole different range of professions that have to collectively come together and work, and also share what they're doing very openly, so that information can be translated and start to be adopted, and we can really ramp up the speed of research that's going on. And I think that's a change that's happened relatively recently. Because these technology developments are relatively recent, if we think about it. They haven't been around for 100 years. They're relatively recent. And the catch up of doing the work, there's a time lag with that. So we're probably now I think we're perched on the tip getting towards the tipping point where we can start to think about their use and their adoption. But without this sort of big picture research, as well as generation of these small ideas, it's very difficult for that to be seeded all the way through to it coming to an NHS near you.
Okay, there's one that's on that topic. One that's just come in from Laurel. I'll read it to you. It says all kinds of technologies are becoming available, but what is going on with the neurologists to educate and encourage them to demand improvements in better and more qualified measurement of symptoms? How could time be created in clinic for neurologists to use patient-derived data? Andy, do you want to come in on that?
I just wanted to follow up on Lynn's before we go to that question.
Okay, right.
Just a very practical kind of thing. The most technical universities have a portal that you can interact with if you've got an invention. I know in Scotland at Strathclyde we have a funding from the Scottish government, so that they'll give you £5,000 worth of initial development to do like a 6-month project. So that in the States, you've got your technical universities, Caltech or whatever. Each state has its own technical university, and I'm sure they would be interested in they'll have some similar kind of interface for you. I just wanted to say that.
I can come in on the neurology question if that helps.
Yes, yes, yeah.
I'm not a neurologist, but I work very closely and have a lot of neurology colleagues who would be really open and would are very much embracing of the technology that's available. So there is an interest, but the evidence to use those tools has to be provided as well. You can't expect people to change a whole health system if there is not enough robust evidence for their utility. So the two things go hand in hand, but there is a massive amount of interest from neurologists on in this area, and many neurologists are actually involved in driving forward the evidence base as well. And in the UK, there's a big piece of work going on now through the National Institute of Health Research, led by a neurologist, Camille Carroll, who is looking at remote trials and delivery of remote trials. And this is has a research agenda, of course, that's evaluating these technologies and how they can be used in the future. Research development goes hand in hand with clinical advances as well. So if you see it happening in one area with good evidence, it will come through, be pulled through into the clinical space as well, ultimately.
Okay, time is pressing on. We've got 5 more minutes of questions. And it's great that people are sending some new questions are coming in. Can I slightly lean on Lynn and Joe at the moment? Are there any questions that I've missed from the past that you think we ought to be putting to the panel?
John, there was just one that I think Kyle was going to answer about the Microsoft Watch, and quite a few people have been asking about what happened to that.
Okay, what was the question? Have you got it there?
Yes, so Keith asked, the introduction of digital aids is without doubt the way forward. However, in 2017, Emma Lawton and Microsoft worked on the Emma Watch, which clearly showed a significant reduction in tremor. Where has it gone?
Yeah, I mean, I think somebody's commented saying that you can buy these. I would say this is a common issue, a challenge, I think, with these types of technologies, where you have potentially a sort of much smaller market for these. And you know, I look at any of the technologies from the assistive and augmented communication or assistive technologies that, and in fact, as we heard from Andy as well, you know, the price tag on some of these things is enormous, and actually it's because of the amount of research that has to be invested in that. So as a result, I think for a lot of these startups, it's very, very difficult to make that transition and to create something that is a viable business. And I think that's the really unfortunate thing, because there's a lot of wonderful inventions and innovations that actually there isn't a sensible, sustainable business model. And I think that's one of the sort of tricky things that we still haven't cracked and gotten right. And I think, you know, one of the reasons why I mentioned in ours, all of our stuff is open source. And the intention being here is that if we were to start charging a license, then all of a sudden then there becomes then an additional fee that needs to be paid, and less likelihood that somebody can sort of pick this up and use it and make a go of it and make a business of it. The intention here is that we want this to be something that's owned by the community themselves. The other thing that we've been trying to do with ours is, because it is a reprogrammable device, we're trying to make sure that this can work for other types of studies, other types of communities as well. So actually, the group in Newcastle are sort of underway with a study now where they've been using this exact same device with different software running on the band to do acute rehabilitation for children with brain trauma injuries. So the sort of I think the sort of clever thing is sort of trying to find ways that actually you can create additional revenue streams for these, or ways that you can remove some of those costs and barriers. But I guess the other danger you've got always with these is that anything that is marked as a clinical device or an intervention has to go through much more rigorous processes. And I think that tends to be the area where a lot of these things struggle. And it comes back to also the point that Lynn's making. There needs to be a significant evidence base behind these things in order to get those badges and to have that merit. And I think that, I don't know particularly for this case, but I know certainly for a lot of devices in the past that those tend to be the barriers and the challenges. And I think this is why it's quite interesting when you look at, you know, this approach of RAISE, you know, using a device that is a personal tracking device. I think the Apple Watch might actually have some medical device rating and certification now for some of the stuff that it does. But the point being is it's not its intended purpose. It's actually been something that has been able to repurpose it and re-engineer it to do. And I think that's what's quite exciting actually is you know, depending on what you really need from it. If it's just something that can support you as an individual and it works for you, then do you need to have all that evidence and all that medical stuff behind it? You know, if it is an intervention that supports you and actually improves your quality of life, then that might be sufficient, it might be enough. And I think what we need is different routes to that innovation happening.
We're nearly run out of time. I've got one, I think, quite humorous question I'll throw in at the end. But before I do that, perhaps Ray and Wendy, are there any comments that you can bring to the meeting in terms of what you've heard about what's going on in the UK today with compared with what's going on in California? Are there any things that are similar or things that you're thinking, wow, that's great, they're doing it in the UK?
I don't think we know enough except from what we've heard today. I mean, but this is a kind of select group. These are people who are passionate about technology and Parkinson's.
Sure.
So, but you know, when we collaborated with Heiko in Germany, we definitely had a sense of a little bit less of a barrier, an institutional barrier. And maybe it has to do with the difficulties in healthcare in the US. I mean, you can see it in terms of our COVID reaction or lack thereof. I mean, some of that, the responsibility is elsewhere.
Well.
But I think, you know, we just find that even working in a large healthcare organization called Kaiser, which is one of the biggest health maintenance organizations, probably, well, certainly in the US, the doctor doesn't really have time to look at something else besides his or her own agenda.
Okay.
So, you know, and our sense was in Germany, there was a little bit more wiggle room there. There was a little bit more of a cushion with in the interaction with the healthcare world.
Okay, thanks for that.
That was one.
Now, Fiona gave me, I think, what is probably a pressing question for her. She said, I have access to a Wii balance board. You know, are there any games, exercises that have been found to be helpful for improving balance and coordination for people with Parkinson's? I can offer an answer. My wife and I challenge each other to wobble with a board and get the marbles down a hole in the middle, whatever that game's called. I don't know if anyone on a more scientific level have got a game that they recognize on the Wii exercise board. The thing I don't like with the exercise board and things is it has rude things like you've gained weight since the last time you were here. But anybody got any recommendations for games? There we go. I'm sorry, Fiona, I did try. The other one I like.
I would say anything that keeps you actually interested, because I think a lot of people give up quite quickly on these kind of games. Anything that keeps you doing it regularly would probably be the best thing, I would say.
Right. Yeah. And the penguins falling off the iceberg is one other one as well, I think. But perhaps I'm the expert here on Wii games. Anyway, it's now time for me to, before I bring back Rory for his concluding remarks, I need to say a few thank you remarks, and particularly thank you to all of you who've presented your papers here today. It's been outstanding presentations, and I think from the questions we've had, altogether we've had 33 questions, of which 25 were answered by yourselves, so that was brilliant, and you've answered some of the others subsequently. So thank you so much for what you've done. And indeed, thank you to Werner, whose brainchild this afternoon was, and who's also thinking of the structure for the next two. Joe Coburn, who's secretary of the research group, who does a great job of keeping us up to speed and in preparation for this afternoon. Liz Nash, the Parkinson's UK Research Support Network Manager, who has such a wide knowledge of what's going on in Parkinson's research. And again, Liz has been invaluable in bringing the today's event to reality. And last but not least, thank you to all of you who came in to the meeting. We now have 91 online at the moment. We had well over 100 earlier on. So that's fantastic. I think to help us finalize the structure for the February and March meetings, I think, Liz, you've got a poll that you want to bring up on screen?
I do. I can launch that after Rory's closing remarks. So if everyone's happy to stay on, Werner has put together a few questions to poll the audience. I'll put that up right at the end.
We'll do that afterwards. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to hand over back to our special guest, Rory, again, to sum up the afternoon. Rory.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's been great. I've been so impressed by the variety of presentations on so many aspects of the kind of technology that can help in various ways. What really came across to me was the importance of user-centric design. That these devices, these schemes need to be focused so much on the patient, and we know how different we all are, people with Parkinson's, and what different attitudes to technology we all bring with us. So that is incredibly important. I think I came away with two feelings, actually: huge excitement, but also quite a lot of frustration. I think anyone, especially someone relatively new to diagnosis, is just so eager to be involved in anything that can help. And the thing about technology these days is it's really personal. When I was growing up, technology was all about landing on the moon and nuclear power stations and stuff. You would never have a nuclear power station in your back garden, and you weren't likely to go to the moon. Now we've all got these devices. We're all able to have access to incredibly powerful computers. We're all eager to use them and want to find where to use them to help run our lives. I want to get on with it, frankly. And so a number of the schemes that we've heard about, a number of the ideas we've heard about have been around for quite a while. We heard about the Microsoft one that seems to have slightly gone away. So what I slightly feel is, why is it not happening faster? And why is the medical community not really pushing this? I'm sure some neurologists are. My neurologist is great. Doesn't appear to know anything about any of this. And so there's quite a big communication job to do with it. The other thing that really struck me was whether we need to do more, the research community needs to do more in linking with existing technology and the power, frankly, of the giant platforms. I mean, I'm wearing one of these Apple Watches, wouldn't like to plug them, but is that going to be a better route, getting apps onto devices like these than developing standalone kit, which, as we've heard, is difficult sometimes to get a business model for. So the potential there. The other thing that slightly struck me is, has enough research been done into the whole area of exercise, physiotherapy, activity like that, and what works and what doesn't? I speak as someone who's done his Pilates class in this very room this morning online, and has started doing a whole bunch of online classes that are not designed for Parkinson's, but I'd like to know more. I'd like to see more research on what does work and what does not. And I think we've also got a very important educational job to do. I was kind of really annoyed during this event where I was tweeting to be tweeted at by a person who was a mobile phone skeptic who believes that Parkinson's might be caused by emissions from mobile phones or Wi-Fi, and shouldn't we be looking at that? And then I said, my head went into my hands. there's an awful lot of fake science out there, a lot of bad science out there, a lot of misinformation. And I think what's great about what we've heard this afternoon is how much good science there is. But it's very important to get that good science out there to counteract the bad science. And events like this, I think, can build a community of people dedicated to that good science and spreading that message far and wide. So thank you all very much for doing that. You're fighting a really important and very good fight.
Right. Thank you for that, Rory. And I'm just looking at the order of doing things in now. I think Mark will say a few words at the end, but at the moment here is a poll that we would like you to tick the boxes. And I think there's a few more polls to come after it. Are there, Liz, remind me?
Oh, just this one, which is 6 questions.
Just this one, okay.
Thank you.
Says the host and panelists can't vote. So there's 6 questions altogether. You need to scroll up to answer them, and this will be invaluable support for when we plan the next two events in February and March. You've been very instrumental in this event. You're muted.
Werner's online now, so maybe we can let him explain.
Okay, Werner.
Well, the idea is to find a structure for the next meeting. We have 4 categories of symptoms, and we would just like to know what the opinion of the members, of the participants about each of these categories of symptoms is, and if there's a possibility for developing tools, if they see any potential for themselves, and if they think that there's enough technology to develop the tools.
Okay.
Thank you, Werner. Joe, do you want to say a few things?
No, on you go, Mark. I think it's important to get
this in particular, it was fantastic talks, fantastic issues being raised, fantastic suggestions being made about going forward. One of the key things I felt towards the end was, when are we having enough power to make this happen? Or how are we going to make it happen? We need to stand together very strongly. We need to combine all our efforts. So the efforts made by your research, the research going in other areas as well. In Scotland, there are now 4 research interest groups, and we try and work together. We need to be working together to get the voices of 12,000 people with Parkinson's in Scotland together, to get those together with the people in England and Wales, add them to the Europeans, add them to the Pacifics, Africa, third world countries where there is a very poverty in terms of the ability to get anywhere near the treatment we receive in these countries, the States and Canada and Latin America. If we collectively make our voices strong enough, we will get that finance. If we don't, we'll be simply subject to the process of economy. And therefore, I would encourage everybody to join organizations that you feel would be coming together stand to hopefully bring an end to this illness. And I thank everybody, Werner again particularly, to bring such a high-profile panel together. And I thank you all for joining. But I would also ask you, next time, please bring another 100 people with you, because we need to grow the momentum behind our movement, that we need to combine, put more resources in, and bring an end to Parkinson's disease.
Thank you, Mark. Liz, is the quiz, the poll is still open, is it?
Yeah, we have 57 of 64 people have voted. So I think it's probably safe for me to close that in a moment.
Okay, and I think with that, as I said earlier, thank you for coming. We normally say safe journey home, but the only thing is a safe journey is for Rory to come down from his attic and other people to go on with the rest of your evening. Have a nice Saturday evening, and thank you for coming.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Hosting
inviting me.
us, yes.
And here's the results if anybody wants to see them.
And Liz, will you put the link to the recording in the Eventbrite follow-up information?
Yeah, so we will we'll have the recording back from Zoom shortly. We'll work to get that uploaded to YouTube sometime next week or so. And I'll be sure to get that link to Werner so he can circulate it to everyone that registered via Eventbrite. But it will also eventually live on the Parkinson's UK website on our research events page. And I'll be sure to ask Werner to pop that link into your post-event emails as well.
Cool.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ray and Wendy. Have a nice rest of your day.